Good afternoon, everybody. Before we begin, some legal disclosures. We want to let you know that our webinar today is being recorded for educational and training purposes. This recording may include questions provided to you during the live event, and the recording will be made available after the conclusion of the live event and posted on Carlton Fields' website. With that, I'd like to welcome everybody, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Jen Liu, the chair of our firm's development industry group. Our attorneys and other professionals assist clients from soup to nuts on all asset classes of development deals. Carlton Fields hosts this community and development series of events to cultivate a trusting community in which to share ideas and spark thoughts. Today, when we face the coronavirus pandemic and other difficult issues, it's more important than ever that we come together to share ideas, support our communities, and get through this unprecedented crisis together. The CARES Act, and specifically the PPP program, have been a critical piece in the government's response to COVID. Today, our panel of a banker, a CPA, and an attorney will focus on the challenges and concerns associated with its implementation and the future of potential stimulus programs. So with that, I want to give a brief introduction of each of our presenters. I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible because we want to get into the meat and hear what they each have to say about the CARES Act and the PPP. Our first panelist is Melissa Henry, who is a CPA and the director of CBIZ MHM in Clearwater. She has more than 25 years of experience in the accounting industry, including 8 years with a Big Four firm. Her experience includes leadership roles in accounting, audit, and financial reporting for both publicly and privately held companies. She most recently served as the VP of corporate accounting for a large publicly traded financial services company. Our second panelist, Owen LaFave, serves as the Pinellas County Market President for the Bank of Tampa. He leads the strategic direction of the Bank of Tampa's Pinellas County offices, as well as the efforts to expand and further develop the bank's presence in Pinellas County. Prior to his current role, Owen served as Commercial Real Estate Director, where he has played a key leadership role in helping to further develop the commercial real estate department by accelerating new business growth for the portfolio and further establishing the department as a key specialty area for the bank. Owen has nearly 20 years of experience in banking, all of which has been spent in Tampa. And our last but not least, our own Ken Tinkler, who's a shareholder in our Carlton Fields office in Tampa. He is a government law specialist who focuses on resolving disputes with and among government agencies involving land use regulation, environmental permitting, ethics regulation, and election law. He represents individuals and corporations petitioning federal, state, and local government agencies, financial institutions, and home builders determining project viability, and state, county government, and constitutional officers regarding complex and politically sensitive matters. With that, we're going to jump into the presentation. The structure of the presentation is we have a series of questions prepared for each of the speakers, for each of the panelists. They will then each give their thoughts and responses to those. All of our attendees are going to be muted during the presentation, but if you have a question, please there should be a chat button at the bottom part of your screen. Please go ahead and type that in during the presentation. Time permitting, at the end of the presentation, we'll ask those questions and get their thoughts on those questions. If we don't have time, I know that each of the speakers, you see their contact information up on the screen, would be more than happy for you to reach out to them directly, contact them with any questions you might have, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you about that then. With that, our first question, Melissa, this is directed to you first. Your thoughts on the impact of the CARES Act and specifically the PPP program to date so far.
Sure, thank you. Happy to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I expect that our experience at my firm will be similar to the other speakers this afternoon. We had a significant number of clients who did receive the PPP loan. They, for the most part, all applied quickly when the program started. Similar to most companies, they wanted to get in prior to the funds for the initial round running out. After application, their application process was quickly followed by some concern around whether they needed the funds, whether they could make those certifications. And some of that concern may still exist today. We did have a few clients who returned their loan proceeds after they had the opportunity to take a deeper dive into the rules, particularly around the affiliation rules. We had at least one client who, because of the concern around need and the concern around having to make those certifications, they didn't apply in the first round. However, the further we got into April, May, they did experience greater negative impact than they had originally anticipated. So they did apply in the second round. But at the same time, we also had clients who did not qualify. They're more investment-based. They don't have the employee head count that would warrant taking out a loan or applying for the loan, but they were greatly impacted as well. So we had a bit of every scenario that you could have across the board with our client base.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Melissa. And Owen, I guess the same question for you, the impact of the CARES Act and the PPP program so far from your perspective.
I appreciate that, Scott. So, mixed results. I feel pretty confident that without it, things would be exponentially worse. And I think what I'd like to do is kind of start at 30,000 foot level and kind of work my way down a little bit. But, the CARES Act was $2.2 trillion of a stimulus package. And to put a little bit of that in perspective, in 2008, our package was $870 billion. So it's over 2.5 times larger. So it's really unprecedented. They really tried to throw everything in the kitchen sink at it to ensure that the bottom of the economy just wouldn't fall out. So within the CARES Act, there was about about $560 billion for individuals, about $500 billion for large businesses. Also included within that was state and local fund allocations and for public health testing and student loans. And of course, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the PPP fund. The initial allocation for that was $350 billion. Of course, that was gone in a 2-week period of time. And there was a separate allocation for $310 billion that came in later for round 2. But the goal and intent of PPP was to keep employees on the payroll and off the state's unemployment registry. So really it was an attempt to ensure that those jobs remain viable and that those businesses would be there. And those employees could at some point in time go back to those jobs or remain employed through the stay-at-home order. About 30 million small businesses generate about 50% of our GDP. So you can kind of understand where the government was coming from when we were requiring businesses to close and why they chose to focus on that area. And, small businesses with less than 500 employees account for almost half of our nation's jobs. So, that was the intent and focus. Where that ultimately ends up and how successful that was, I think it still remains to be seen. Economists estimate that PPP safeguarded about 16 million jobs. But we've also seen in the last 3 months, 42 million Americans file for first-time unemployment. We did have some good news in May, so the jobs numbers came in and kind of surprised to the upside by, 9 million. We thought that we were going to lose 7 million for the month. We actually gained 2.5 million. So I think a lot of that was, contributed or they believe it was due to, employees rehiring, employers rehiring those employees and going back on the payroll. But there were some that were, some industries were unequivocally hit harder than others, like restaurants and some retail and hospitality, certainly. And I think without the PPP fund, those businesses will be gone. And we've already seen, 3.3 million businesses that have shuttered as a result of the shutdown, which is just staggering. Those jobs are gone for good. But I do feel very confident that without PPP, it would be exponentially more than that.
Right. Thanks, Owen. Ken, I guess the same question to you.
Yeah, I think Melissa and Owen had covered this very well. The PPP, as with everything coming out of Congress, was a compromise. And you've seen a lot of this in the CARES Act, where different programs were tapped that were existing, trying to use them in an emergency manner that hadn't been done before. So I think Owen is correct that we have to look at the scale. We have to look at the fact that we're talking about several $1 trillion in total in terms of the overall CARES Act, and so much money then associated with the PPP that at this point hasn't all been spent. I think as we dig into this and further questions today, we can explore how perhaps this could have been done a little better, or what we've learned from it as time goes on. But I think it's very interesting that we're in an experiment right now as to a kind of government program that hadn't existed before. And I think it was also thought at the time, at least the intent of Congress, but this was going to be a very short-term need. And obviously we are continuing to see cases rise, to see the overall impacts of this to our economy. So how this then adapts over time will certainly be something that will be interesting. But I think it's a good way to begin the program.
Yeah, it's certainly an unprecedented time, no doubt. I think some of you have covered a little bit of this, these next two questions, but in small parts. But generally speaking, what challenges have you seen with the rollout of these efforts? And also, what are the typical concerns you're seeing your clients raising? And to the extent that they're raising those issues, how have you dealt with them individually? And on this one, I think, Owen, we'll start with you.
Well, just to let Ken know, I prefer to go by Henry, but Owen is Owen's just fine. No, I think Ken hit the nail on the head a little bit, because it is an experiment. So this was not a well-oiled machine at all. I mean, they rolled out a program with little to no information, and everyone kept saying that, we're building the plane while it's still in the air, and it definitely felt like that. And at any given point in time, we're going to bring it to a crash landing. But I do also want to acknowledge the fact that the government did deploy $350 billion through local banks in a period of 2 weeks. So that feat in itself was incredible, but there's no way that you can put that amount of money into the economy, and the thing was always going to be a mess. So really, we are implementing a program with limited to no guidance, and so it was a function of trial and error. And by the way, we were also implementing it in the middle of a pandemic with 40% of our workforce working from home, and then quickly came to the realization that you needed 2 monitors in order to put or order to have any level of productivity with the SBA E-Tran system. And then just getting our bankers assigned and authorized to the E-Tran system was a whole nother headache and nightmare. But I mean, we had bankers working 16 hours a day for 14 straight days to ensure that all of our clients were taken care of. And I'm very proud to say, and it is a moment of pride to say that Bank of Tampa had all of our customers that applied and gave us the information that we needed to process PPP loans. 100% of them were approved through the system. So we had issued loans for $386 million, and we're estimating that helped preserve about 30,000 jobs. But the constant changes to the programs, and I think, there was actually one that some additional guidance that came out last night, and I have lost count. I think my estimates are right, but we had about 20 interim financial rules that had came out, about 50 periods of guidance. Through that period of time, you may also recall initially that Wells Fargo, which was the 3rd biggest bank in the nation, wasn't allowed to initially participate because of the regulatory issues. And so that initially cut out millions of small businesses that banked with Wells that were looking for other resources. And, thankfully, a lot of community banks were able to step in and fill that void. But, I guess one of the other things that also comes to mind about the challenges was, sole proprietors represent about 81% of all small businesses in the United States, and they couldn't apply until week 2. So there very much was this panic where everybody wanted to apply for it. And then, as kind of Melissa mentioned, and then when they were looking at the certifications and, the safe harbor and the threat of audits and jail time, then everyone wanted to get it back. And, a few companies actually did pay at that. So it's been quite the process. And other than that, it's been great. It's been amazing.
Ken, same question to you. What challenges you've seen?
For us, it's been a similar kind of scenario. I know when this first began, we had an associate in our Miami office who got up to speed on his own, which was wonderful. And when I found out about that and we were trying to figure out the best way to respond, I got him on a call with any lawyers in the office who were interested in joining in, and suddenly he's talking to 150 people. And he, of course, had just joined us 2 weeks before. So quite the welcome that he had to Carlton Fields. We transitioned into a 10-person just PPP group with a much larger group dealing with overall CARES Act. But I think we saw the same kind of questions, the same kind of frustrations with especially the affiliation rules up front. A lot of groups that had simply not participated in the small business administration programs before, and suddenly we're into not only the SBA program, but a modified version of it. So it became a learning challenge, first for the lawyers to get up to speed, and I'm sure with the rest of the professionals, and then trying to explain this to clients that clearly were not in their typical mode. They may have been working from home already. They may have had part of their staff already out. So it was a very challenging environment to roll out such a complicated aspect to the new program and all, but I think we all made the best of it.
Right. Thank you, Ken. Melissa, same question for you, the challenges you've seen and the typical concerns that your clients might be raising with you.
Sure. Same challenges. The rules being fluid presented challenges to us as advisors to our clients. It's very difficult to give timely advice and guidance when the rules keep changing. And even to Owen's point, we had a revision last night that finally answered one of the questions we had on timing of the forgiveness application. So in my office, I'm the one that goes out every morning, the website or the Treasury website to see what's new. And I was like, oh, we just asked this question earlier this week or the end of last week. Here's the answer. And I blasted out through our local office. But yeah, you got to the point where you just did not want to have to tell another client or another professional within our firm, that's a great question. We're waiting on additional guidance. And that was the answer that was just the stock answer we had for a lot of the questions. As for typical concerns, clearly the certification, the affiliation, we actually saw here locally a couple of private companies that expressed concerns about negative PR if it were to become public that they received a loan. So we did have some discussions around that. That's starting to percolate now is what is the impact or what will be the impact to M&A transactions or other strategic initiatives. If your target company took a PPP loan, what does that mean? So we're having discussions around, should this slow down the process? Will this delay closings of transactions for M&A? Or strategic initiatives, you're working on your business plan. You have a initiative to maybe restructure your legal organization and move employees around within that legal structure. You're not getting rid of employees. You're just moving them from legal entity to legal entity. What does that mean today in this environment? And we've actually had clients put those initiatives on hold just because of the concern that it may lead to issues with the forgiveness process. So that's the latest hot topic that's starting to
Excellent. Well, that's sort of where we've been and how we got here. Kind of looking ahead a little bit, Melissa, what do you think, Congress, if anything, what do you think they should change about the current program?
Change about the current program. What I would like to see Congress and anyone involved is to just avoid confusion going forward if we can. Anticipate the follow-on questions. We've had so many iterations of revisions, and every time we come out with, that's great, we've answered these questions, but now we have new questions. If we could get into this process of anticipating the next one or two steps or the next one or two questions, that would probably be very helpful. So I would say the avoiding confusion. For the forgiveness program, you know, what we've seen, and I don't know if that's the question we're on right now, but so my suggestion to Congress, confusion, let's try to think ahead, and then in the next round, you know, maybe be more targeted, more strategic in who gets stimulus next. Because as we've already noted this morning, some companies came through this without the without being impacted as much as we may have thought initially, but then the restaurants and hospitality, those folks clearly have needs that have not been completely addressed. We know that those folks are going to need more, and I think we're hearing Congress has a new program in place that they are considering, so that should be helpful for those industries.
That's great. Owen, what do you think about, you know, what should Congress address, if anything, differently?
You know, well, first I'd like to at least commend them for the, you know, the payroll flexibility act that was passed. So give them devil's due and applaud them for, you know, reducing the payroll requirement from 75% to 60%. I mean, that flexibility has been welcomed by business owners. They also, within that revision, they had provided flexibility in the coverage period from 8 to 24 weeks. What I would like to see is that some flexibility of something in the middle. So say if someone wanted to choose, you know, 12 weeks or 16 weeks or, you know, just something in between the 8 or 24 period of time. A lot of that just stemming from the fact that a lot of businesses were only operating at partial capacity. But to give businesses that flexibility, I think would be very helpful. One of the things that have been talked about, and they keep threatening, and we'll see if it actually happens or not, is to come up with some de minimis loan amount of forgiveness. So I guess the latest number that's been thrown around is $150,000. So any business that had received a loan of $150,000 would be automatically forgiven. That I think would eliminate a lot of stress for those business owners, as well as, you know, the banks that are going to have to go in and approve all of those applications. It would be extremely helpful. And then I think, you know, finally, to both Melissa and Ken's point, when we're talking about a lot of those businesses that, you know, were adversely impacted a little more with the restaurants, bars, and hotels, you know, two and a half months of compensation to come up with the PPP loan amount doesn't seem to be enough in those businesses who've only been able to operate at partial capacity. So the ability to go back in and increase those loan amounts, or to have some other supplement to the stimulus program would be really helpful.
Excellent. And Ken, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I would just build on that. I think having the ability to get a second loan or to be able to extend out what has already been put in place would be vital for many businesses. I think the biggest, going back a little bit and leading into this question, one of the biggest fears that was caused was post the public companies being revealed on CNN or other news sources as having received funds. There was suddenly a panic, and the calls that we were getting were, am I going to prison because I got a PPP loan? They became a bit of hysteria in regards to that reaction and how you, the changing definitions at a Treasury as to how you could meet the different requirements. I think that has settled a bit as Treasury has calmed down a little bit. But before, in preparation for the program, I went back and looked at the CARES Act itself, at the original document. And while it's still, of course, in the legislative, overly complex language, it was a lot more straightforward than the program that we're running today in terms of how we're handling things. So I think the more that we can get back to a focus on the fact that this should be keeping people on the payroll and off of unemployment, as opposed to getting lost in a lot of the minutia about the Small Business Administration's process and how we're going to handle things, and whether or not even a loan program makes sense in this regard versus a grant program. I'm hopeful that we'll see a little more help with Congress. A good example is the 60% change by Congress this past time. The 75% part, split between 75% payroll and 25% other expenses, which is made up by Treasury. That was not in the original CARES Act. It was their interpretation of what was appropriate at the time. And now Treasury is ignoring the fact that what's in the law says you have to have at least 60%. They're allowing for a partial forgiveness process. So there's a few legal challenges down the road as far as this process goes, unless Congress can clean this up a bit. But I think we're all learning as we go.
Right. And I think it is important to remember. I'm sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
Going back to one of the comments Owen made, even the revision that came out yesterday, I think actually addressed your comment about having a time period between 8 weeks and 24 weeks. So that's another example where the SBA and the Treasury looked at what came out of Congress, and I think they actually addressed that last night. So okay. Everyone can go back and read it. It's 30-some pages. It's maybe a third of the way through.
Gotcha. Well, and I do think that's an important point that Owen brought up, and each of you sort of touched on, is that this was sort of an unprecedented experience and the need for this. And, Congress had to move so quickly, and they did move quickly and got it out, and, they should be commended. But because of that, it seems pretty clear that there were a lot of things that were lacking, a lot of things that could have been done differently or better. And we are, I think, as Ken says, sort of learning as we go, and hopefully we're, maybe doing better. The sort of on the same lines of the last question, but a little bit different, I think, perspective. If you were in charge, so not necessarily the changes to the CARES Act or the PPP program, but if you were in charge, what would you, like to see out of some sort of a future stimulus package? I mean, even if it was something different from what we have in place now. And I think for this one, we'll start with Ken.
Yeah, I think this has been an interesting experiment using loans that then can be forgiven. I was kind of hinting at that. I would think for smaller businesses, I would love to see more of a grant style program, very simple, able to understand it and able to process it. Obviously, you need to have checks and balances in the system to deal with fraud. And we've seen some pretty notable cases where there's been prosecutions along those lines. But I think there's just a different scale between a company getting a $10 million loan and a company getting a few $100,000 in this kind of aspect of things, and especially with the stress on businesses at this point. I'd also love to see, and this is probably a dream, is thinking about things long term. How can we have things on the books that then would be unfunded, but programs available to implement? The PPP, as it's set up right now, will get removed from the law by the end of the year in terms of its effectiveness. I'd love to see us learn from this kind of program and have something that we're able then to spin up even a much more rapid fashion that could be funded by Congress. And we already have some of the rules worked out, some of the process worked out. So there's less of the panic at the beginning if a circumstance like this happens again.
Great, thank you, Ken. Owen, what are your thoughts? What would you do differently, or what would you, if you were in charge, how would you address this issue?
If I was the dictator for the day.
Yeah.
So we still have about 20 million people that are unemployed, and our unemployment assistance program is set to expire on July 31st, and there is conversation about, will it be extended or not. Of course, there's our president is saying that, he doesn't see the need for any future stimulus beyond that. But I mean, many industries and parts of the economy are still not able to fully operate. So I would like to see some intervention beyond that. I think what you've seen in the multifamily and apartment market is that market holding up relatively well, but it's because people are getting $600 checks. Once that runs out at the end of July, it'll be interesting to see, what the impact is going to be on landlords and other services related to real estate. Of course, some of the legislation was about the inability to, evict residents and without any additional relief as a result of that. I mean, that all trickles down. I mean, I think a lot of folks on this call are a little more forgiving to, entrepreneurs and business owners and property owners. But when the residents aren't able to pay, then they can't pay the bank loan, and they can't pay the people who maintain the property and the landscaping and insurance. And so there is a trickle-down effect through the rest of the economy that results in additional job losses, all starting with the inability to pay rent. So there's been conversation about, additional rental and mortgage assistance program. I think absolutely that's needed. And this one is a little bit off the wall, and I will say this because it's not really related to stimulus, but our trade policies over the last 30 years has resulted in about, our middle class is now about half the size of the middle class in India and China. So we've really subsidized our jobs through the rest of the world by our trade policies. And yes, I mean, we've done a very noble thing, and we reduced poverty by 1.3 million people worldwide, and probably gained a little bit of peace and stability for that. But we've lost our manufacturing jobs, and I think the pandemic has really pointed out of the fact that our supply chains are compromised. We couldn't get PPE out of China. We learned that 80% of our medication is produced there, which puts us at significant risk. And so I think long term, make America manufacture again, bring manufacturing back, combine that with some sort of skills act to trade the workers, or train the workers, and I think bring back our middle class, and maybe that's solve some of our socioeconomic problems as well long term.
Excellent. Melissa, how about you?
Well, to piggyback on Ken's thoughts around developing this into a program that we could stand up as needed, we haven't heard a lot about that, or at least I haven't in my accounting world. From the accountant's perspective, when we look at how we're going to account for this in our clients' financial statements, we're actually looking over to the international accounting rules, because they have standards in place for grants to public companies, not just nonprofits, but for-profit companies. That is something that I think is very worthwhile for us here in the U.S. to look at, because there will probably be another time where we're going to need to have something similar, and we're going to have the same conversation. So if we can tackle that ahead of time, I think we will all be much better off. And to follow up Owen's thoughts on real estate, clearly, a lot of mom and pops who own real estate have been impacted right now, and they have yet to get any stimulus. They've not had any help. Possibly if their mortgage lender is granting a concession to them, we're seeing those mom and pops and the strip center owners really trying to go out and work with their tenants to keep their tenants in business, to keep their tenants in existence for the future. So I think those are some areas where some stimulus assistance might be warranted as well.
Great. We do. I'm sorry. Did I miss somebody? No. We do have one question. Oh, go ahead, Owen.
Before you jump in on that, hey, just to kind of finish up a thought there. I mean, what was a great benefit to banks and to landlords within the CARES Act was the ability to allow the banks to be a little flexible. So if you had any issues specifically related to COVID, we could modify your loan payments either with an interest only, so deferring principal payments, or to a full payment deferral without any penalty. So this, in contrast to 2008, when, customers were having issues and came into the bank and said, look, I can't make my payments. The way the regulations were at the time, and I mean, this is just a temporary relief, but it then becomes classified. If you do any modification for them to make that payment easier, it is called, is referred to as what's called a troubled debt restructure, which meant that we had to put additional reserves aside on the balance sheet for that loan. And so that loan is now on the balance sheet. We're not earning anything from it, and we had to put additional reserves aside for it. So it became what banks called a toxic asset. And that's why you saw that big banks in particular, but all banks really move quickly in the last cycle to foreclose and to sell loans and just purge that asset out of the portfolio as quick as possible. That's different this time. So the challenge that, we do have is, that was only for a certain set period of time. And, that will also sunset and expire. We have a very high concentration of clients that are in the medical industry, and they had to shut down completely. Thankfully, for the most part, they are, if not at, back to full operations, they are very close to it. So they're going to rebound. They've all, for the most part, indicated that they're going to be able to continue to make payments. But, again, a constant theme is there's a lot of those industries that aren't in the same position. And so, banks are going to be forced to have to take action. So I just wanted to kind of summarize that point. Melissa made me think of it. So thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, no, I think that's that. Absolutely.
We learned a little bit there, Scott, but we're still got a long way to go.
So, Owen, let me ask you a question on that. That was for banks only, but if you have a mortgage through a non-bank, if you have your commercial mortgage through a non-bank, I don't think CARES Act addressed non-banks. Is that correct?
That's correct. So there are, depending on the lender. So I will say, CMBS lenders in particular, they're an animal of their own, and it's convoluted to, find a connection with someone and then to unwind that because of the pools. There was, within Fannie and Freddie in government loans, there was flexibility provided within the CARES Act, but that didn't necessarily apply to like a life insurance company, for instance.
So we've had one question from the audience. Do we know how much PPP money our region has received comparing to other regions? I'm not sure if anybody knows that or not, but that's one of the questions, and I'd be interested to know that too.
That is an excellent question. I don't know if I've seen any specific data on that. A lot of some of the challenges and scrutiny have been just the record keeping and I think more notably as it pertains to race, but I don't know if we've released any specific information from a geography standpoint. They are, of course, talking about releasing the names of all the companies that had received PPP, or at least I think those above 150,000. But yeah, I haven't seen the geography question answered. I do know there's about 130 billion left, and unless it's extended beyond June 30, there's still going to be a good portion of funds available. But I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
I've seen some from a state standpoint as far as numbers being put out there, but not from just the Tampa Bay region. But we can certainly, if those come up, we'll be glad to send it to the attendees. As you said, I think the next very interesting wave is going to be as far as disclosure, and the fact that this started out as a non-disclosure aspect of things. That's what Treasury was putting out. I think we've been warning clients from the beginning, expect that all this will be disclosed. That is typically the end result as far as these things go, and that's probably appropriate given the circumstances.
I had one question that came up. I think, Melissa, you were talking early on about how clients would call you, and Ken, I think you too, and just didn't really have answers yet because it was so new and so early, and you just didn't have the guidance and the interpretation available. So my question, I think, is what, if anything, are you to each of you telling your clients today that you might have been telling them differently, at the outset of this? And not to put you on the hot spot, but and whoever wants to start, first, would be fine.
The hot potato. I see Melissa thinking about this one. Scott, that's just such a difficult question to answer because, like I said, there's been 20 IFRs. So, things have changed, dramatically over the course of since it was, first came to market on April 2nd. I think, where we're at now, the big piece that's missing is just the forgiveness piece. And, I think even with the guidance, and I have not clearly fully absorbed what was released, last night yet, but there was still a number of additional questions. And so we do have clients that are very eager to submit for forgiveness. And for questions like, for clients like sole proprietors, where it's a very easy calculation, or self-employed individuals where they have the one employee, it should be very clear cut. for companies that have multiple employees that maybe had, had to reduce, some of their FTEs or employees or couldn't hire those employees back, it does appear that, we finally got some of that guidance yesterday, how to treat that. But I mean, I think, at this stage, we've asked all of our clients to just be patient. We are, and I think a lot of banks are using a technology solution to help upload all that information. What was kind of interesting, and I'm curious to get Melissa and Ken's opinion on it. But the easy form that came out, we were very excited at just the title of it. And just like there's your tax return report easy, thought that this is going to be an easy solution. And as we kind of understand it, it may be a little easier for the SBA and the Treasury. It's not any easier for the client because they still have to provide all the exact same information they had to before. But yeah, at this stage, I mean, we still anticipate that, when the program expires at the end of the month, that we'll have some additional set of guidance and that we can, at that time, start processing the forgiveness applications. But, we're telling everybody at this point to just be patient and wait.
And I think to add to that, Scott, I think I've ended every conversation with a to be continued. This has been every day, if at least for the last few weeks, we had less of the frequently asked questions. Those were starting to come out on Sunday nights, and we never knew what we'd wake up to. But it has been such an evolving legal issue. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I think we've tried to calm people down that this is a program that is new. It is being figured out on the fly. And I think that has helped. And I would agree on the easy form. I think it has a much better title, a much better branding, but we still have some work to do if we're going to make this easier on different businesses.
Sure.
I think we all have our preferred term that we use with our clients: be patient, to be continued. Mine is stay tuned. It all says the same thing. Like a lot of professional services firms, my firm puts out a forgiveness guide, which is a Excel spreadsheet to help calculate your forgiveness, to capture all the data and calculate your forgiveness, and to help complete those applications. We issued the latest update yesterday before the latest revision came out.
We have certainly encouraged people, first be very good to your banker to make sure they answer your call, and then be very good to your accountant to make sure they get this done right. So I think all of our fields have had the same kind of stresses, the same kind of issues that have been popping up, and it's only been through working as much of a team as everybody can on different professional basis that we've been able to make it through all this.
Yes.
We had another question from the audience. How likely do you think the infrastructure program will be passed by the Congress, and do you think that will be helpful to the economy if it is passed?
Ooh, Ken, that's...
I'd love to jump on that one. Unfortunately, Infrastructure Week has become a joke over the last several years. Typically, the White House would announce we're in Infrastructure Week, and then by the end of the week, we were focusing on something else. I think an infrastructure program, especially with very low interest rates, it would be a tremendous boom to this area, especially with all the different infrastructure problems that we have. Just thinking about all the drama we have over transportation and how to fund all different kinds of improvements. The challenge I see is I have a hard time seeing it passing before November. That we are in full election mode right now, and we can't even get our own state to have a special session when we're having budget issues. So to get Congress to go forward on such a program right now, I think is going to be very challenging. I think there's certainly a need, but I see this more as a post-November, in between, before the next president takes office kind of program that might have more ability to move forward politically.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think I am almost in complete agreement with Ken. I would just add that, at any point in time in our recent history, I think because of the civil unrest that has brought forth just a disparity in income and resources to communities, and where the economy where it is, and the potential to help bring some jobs and some income to much needed areas in our country. I think for that reason it stands as good as a chance as at any point in time. But I think with the election in November, I'm in complete agreement that nothing gets done before.
Okay, well, we're out of questions. I don't see any more questions from the audience. I guess my last question to each of you would be, in summary, what would you have to say about the CARES Act and particularly the PPP program, and from each of your unique perspectives? And I guess we'll start. Maybe we'll just start on my screen in the order I see Melissa first. We'll start with you.
I think we already mentioned it. It was the program at the right time because it was very much needed. Was it rolled out well? It was rolled out as best as it could be, as it could be, to get to the goal of keeping people employed. And hopefully, as we've spoken about today, we can learn from this for next time and have a better roadmap and game plan for next time. Hopefully we don't have it next time, but we learn from it and we take it from there.
All right. Ken, moving along on my screen, I see you next.
Sure, I would echo those kind of comments. I mean, I would like us to see this like we see other disasters. In Florida especially, we prepare for hurricanes all year long. We have very set plans. We require local governments to have plans ready to go. We don't have economic disaster plans along these lines. We don't have that kind of thinking. I think this has given us the opportunity to learn from what we've done this time. And obviously with the hope we don't have to use it, but it's the same for hurricanes. We hope that we don't have to have these kind of impacts. But I don't see the world getting any smaller in terms of how something can spread worldwide in such a quick time. And the more we can use this knowledge base that we've built up and be able to use it going forward, I think that the better off we'll all be in the future.
Agreed. Owen, same question to you.
Well, I hate to be the yes person and just agree with everything on the call, but I will say that it is, we are in truly an unprecedented time in terms of the impact that this has had on the economy, and I don't really think we could truly grasp that yet. One of the things that I bring up in conversation on a fairly regular basis, because it was eye-opening to me, was an article that was in The Economist maybe a month or 6 weeks ago that was talking about the 90% economy. What if we only get back to 90%?
Yes.
And that was really an eye-opener, because in our last recession, we lost 4% of GDP. So we retained 96% of all economic activity at the time, and it was our worst recession since the Great Depression. We're here. I mean, we literally fell off a cliff in March. And I think the damage has already been done to our psyche, because as we're having conversations, and I know all of you are too, there's folks that think this is a complete hoax and there's nothing to worry about, and are refusing to wear masks, and there's people that are refusing to leave their home. Well, enough of those people, if they just refuse to leave their home and don't return to some sense of normalcy, even if there is a vaccine or viable treatment, that 10% is going to have a long-lasting impact on our economy. So, I'd like to believe at some point in time that we return to life as normal. I'm afraid to a certain degree that that may not be the case. But I hate to ramble on here, but I was watching Contagion during the stay-at-home order, and really all the protocol for a pandemic. I mean, that was in a movie, and very clear that all of that was in place, and so it should have been fairly easy to follow. Well, now that we have had to go through an economic crisis related to this, I mean, to Ken's point, Melissa's point, I really do hope that we can have a viable plan that is detailed, that doesn't leave the uncertainty that the CARES Act and PPP specifically has left. So in the event that does happen again, we're all better positioned to see our way through it with less disruption and less uncertainty. And
we can do it. We know corporate America has a planning process. We go through annual budget season. And
yes.
The best practice is to have three versions: best case, worst case, and your expected case. And remember sitting at a continuing ed conference after the last recession, and not long after the last recession, and I heard a local CFO say, that's why we do downside scenarios. We do a downside scenario, a worst case scenario, and we put it in our desk drawer. We pull it out when we need it, and we blow the dust off of it. So we just need to have that from a economic response as well, and I think we can do it.
Right.
That's a good point, Melissa. And you know, the only thing that I would say to that is, you know, there's never a scenario that I am talking to a client about what will happen in the future. What's the best case, worst case? And by the way, the worst case is zero revenue for 2 months. I mean, that's just, it really is unprecedented. But now we look through it. And by the way, if I've got any clients or future clients that are on the call, we're not going to make you come up with one of those scenarios. We hope this is you know, once in a lifetime event. But certainly, I think this is far more worse and longer than we ever anticipated. So we can better plan for that downside.
Yeah, we're all talking about how we do the planning horizon, how we think about this from a government aspect of things. And it seems like we now have some good examples of ways of what to do and what not to do. And I think what you're hearing from all of us is we'd like this to be a learning experience as opposed to we're back here years from now and wondering why we didn't learn anything from it. So I think that is, it sounds like that's our overall hope here, that we can keep building on this.
Well, we've actually had one more question come in. And before we go on to that question, Owen, you actually watched Contagion during the lockdown?
So, in full admission, we sat there probably 3 weeks in, and I pulled it up on Netflix, and my wife looked at me and she's like, "You've got to be joking. I can't right now." And about 2 weeks later, we broke down and we watched it. So yes.
just a glutton, I take it. Okay. So the next question we have is, given the state's budget issues, would you like to see federal help to state and local governments? I know we talked some of you touched a little bit on this. I think it was Ken. So why don't we start with you, Ken?
Sure. Unfortunately, it has become a very political issue right now. We've seen it from our own senators in regards to other states. I don't see another way that it doesn't happen. If you think about the staff of state and local governments, if you suddenly have massive unemployment among teachers, policemen, firemen, just the basic functioning of our system is challenged at that point, especially given what's been occurring here the last few weeks. So I think there's going to have to be federal backstop for that, because a lot of states have a balanced budget requirement. They don't have the revenue coming in, and I think we're going to have to see some pretty dramatic help in order to keep the recession from getting worse, because suddenly we have state and local government employees who are now joining the unemployment rolls.
Owen, any thoughts?
Well, and so I'm coming with only partial information, but Ken, unlike myself, I did not read through, you know, all 180 pages of the CARES Act, or maybe Ken was referring to the PPP legislation. But you know, there was $150 billion in the CARES Act that was to funnel down through state and local governments. I don't have enough information to understand how that was funded. I mean, what I can tell you is that there have been some grant programs, both through Hillsborough County and through Pinellas County and through the cities, that are the beneficiary of those funds coming from the federal government. But, you know, outside of those specific examples, I haven't researched enough to know what's coming.
Okay. Melissa, any thoughts?
Nothing to add on to what Owen just said. I'm aware of the money that was trickled down, and the local governments are having those grant programs. I don't know much more other than that. Okay.
Well, I know I sort of asked you already to give your kind of closing thoughts or overall thoughts, but if anybody has any closing thoughts on our program or on the CARES Act or anything related to that, I'll just sort of open it up one last time for each of you, and we can go through. And if not, then we can end our program. I'll open it up and see if – again, I'll start from right to left this time, and I'll go to Owen first.
Well, I just like to say that I know Ron Weaver was on the call because I did see the registry beforehand, and the questions that were in there were a little too simple for Ron, so I'm a little disappointed he didn't submit a question. But other than that, I mean, I think I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to participate with it in this. It's been a great conversation with Scott, Melissa, Ken. So just, thank you. And as we keep saying, to be continued and more to come, or stay tuned, because I think we've got a long way to go still.
Absolutely. Ken?
I agree. I thank you all for joining us here today, and I really enjoyed the conversation. It shows how all of us as professionals in this kind of industry are trying to grapple with the very new situation and how we can deal with this best going forward. But I'm glad to hear from both the accounting and banking side, we're all dealing with the same issues and all trying to find the same path forward for our clients.
Thanks, Ken. And Melissa, you get the last word.
Well, thank you for inviting me to participate. And I'm glad to see that, here in the Tampa Bay market, our clients and companies have got good resources to reach out to and utilize. And I'm sure I speak for all three, Owen, Ken, and myself. We're here to answer any questions. Please feel free to reach out if and when you have the need.
Well, thank you. And I would just like to say thank you to each of you for taking the time to speak to us today. It's been very informative. It's a very timely topic. Obviously, it's one that is continuing to evolve, and we will stay tuned, and we will keep monitoring it with you, and probably reaching out to each of you to lean on your expertise. And to the audience, I'd like to thank everyone for participating and taking the time to dial in and listen today. And I will just echo what Owen, Ken, and Melissa have said, is that please do reach out to them if you have questions. Please do reach out to them if you have concerns. Those concerns and questions may change over time as things evolve. But I know that they're here to help, and would be more than happy for you to reach out to them and help you. And until then, I'll just say stay safe. And I was going to end it there, but I'll say stay tuned as well, and keep an eye out for our for Carlton Fields' next Community and Development Series. And with that, thank you very much.